Hello, everyone. My name is Davy, and I'm a neural engineer in MIT, and today I will talk a little bit about something a little bit futuristic. So first, I want to ask a question. What is the most important question in the history of science? To some, it may be the origin of the universe. Maybe it is also a cure for cancer. And, sorry, can I get a confirmation? Is this actually flipping the slides? Or try again, OK. OK, I'm just going to start over again. OK, so what is the most important question in the history of science? To some, it may be the origin of the universe. To others, maybe a cure for cancer. And for some specific individuals, it might be how to speak cats. To me, however, the answer is what makes you you. Not spiritually or philosophically, but literally. Your hopes and dreams, your memories, your sense of humor and ambition, where do they all come from? There are some people ranging from techno-futurists to neuroscientists who believe that one day we may be able to take that thing that makes us who we are and upload it to a supercomputer, effectively making physical death irrelevant. When I mention that in Silicon Valley, people lean forward. Some might even believe that that day is just around the corner. But if I mention this in Boston, I tend to get some suspicious looks from me, wondering if I'm a real scientist or maybe a scam artist. As a neuroscientist who has been trained at both Berkeley and then MIT, I've lived in both of these worlds. And it made me wonder, what is it about this concept, about this idea, that packs such a polarizing opinion among the public? From the past overblown promises of Human Brain Project to the current rhetorics of whole brain emulation as a path towards AGI, this topic has always generated massive amount of hopes, criticisms, and controversies. Hollywood also really loves this idea because it's both terrifying and tantalizing at the same time. You have your Westworld, Pantheon, Black Mirror, what have you. But I think that's exactly the problem. When you attach the word immortality to almost anything, rational thinking goes out the window. But science cannot move forward on empty promises or skepticisms. To be truly conducive of scientific progress, we have to remove both the hypes and the doubts. So today I'm here to discuss questions I don't believe have been asked carefully enough before. What will mind uploading actually require? So as it turns out, this dream of mind uploading really hinges upon one giant assumption, that mind is substrate independent, which is to say that consciousness emerges from the computational algorithms of the neurons and thus can be detached from the neurons themselves. Whether the assumption even holds true or not is actually subject to a lot of debate among both the neuroscientists and the philosophers. But for today, we're going to pretend that this assumption is true. Not because this question or this debate doesn't matter, but because we need to first build the tools in order to answer that. Let the data speak, right? So if you pretend or if you assume that mind is substrate independent and it can be copied, then what you're effectively left with is a three-part engineering problem. What data define a mind? How do you measure them? And once you have all of those data, how do you make it run? I think we can all agree that it would be an understatement to say that these questions are difficult. By some popular claims that the human brain could be the most complex structure in the known universe. So what kind of hopes do we even have at tackling challenges of this magnitude? If you ask a mathematician, how do they approach a very complex system? They might say, well, solve a simpler problem first, or convert that problem into a simpler problem. Not because the simple problem is the same problem, but because it forces you to understand what solved even means. So for whole brain emulation to move from mere speculations about fantasies and miracles into a scientifically defensible pursuit, we have to have access to an experimental brain with complete measurement, perturbation, and prediction. In other words, we need ground truth as to what success even means before we can begin quantifying progress. And luckily, our unlikely hero is about to come to our rescue. Meet elegans, about 1 millimeter long, lives in soil, unremarkable by any measures. except it's got a really crazy resume. It is behind at least 4 Nobel Prizes for its contributions to human physiology and medicine. And if I may say, it is also the chief architect of at least 3 different what I call Manhattan projects in biotechnologies. That includes the first demonstration of whole genome sequencing, the first demonstration of whole nervous system mapping, and also the first demonstration of complete cell lineage mapping from embryo to adult. So I think it's not controversial to say that when it comes to the craziest, most moonshot ideas that humanity has ever pursued in biomedical engineering, no other animal can even come close to having this type of track record. And now our warm friends is offering, again, the first opportunity for whole human brain emulation. Why do I say that? And if there's one thing I want you to take away from my talk, because at TEDx, we're all about idea, right? The one idea I want you to take away from this talk is that the future of mind uploading does not depend on a fancy supercomputer. It starts here, with 1 millimeter worms. And let's see why. With only 202 neurons, its entire nervous system has been mapped completely several decades ago. And scientists have since tried to emulate its entire brain in a computer to no avail. Now, that might sound like a little bit disappointing, but I believe it is actually one of the most underappreciated and most important lessons we've learned in this field. Because of these worms, we now know that a mere wiring diagram of the brain does not contain sufficient information to emulate an animal's neural function. You may have heard of the phrase, "you are your connectome." The worm says no. And it actually pushes us to look beyond just a simple anatomical map and look for other types of information that are also needed for simulating the brain. So when I arrived at MIT, that's exactly the advice I took by working on 2 additional layers of information in the context of the anatomical map of the C. elegans with unprecedented resolution and precision. So the first one is chemical and molecular annotation. Using a technique called expansion microscopy, we're able to inflate brain tissues, almost like blowing up a balloon, such that tiny little details in the brain that used to be invisible can now be distinguished. Importantly, this technique also allows us to retain biological signals, such as DNA, RNA, and protein, effectively making a chemical and biological footprints for every synapse in the brain. So it's kind of like giving colors to otherwise black and white pictures of the brain. And it generates a much more detailed and information-rich map of the entire nervous system in C. elegans. Now, the second one is whole nervous system imaging during free behavior. Because C. elegans' small size, we're actually able to record from every single neurons, even when it's moving freely. And so we're building a microscope platform that integrates behavior and neural activity and perturbation response all in one experiment, such that we can obtain dynamical and causal information across the entire nervous system. And when you put these 2 things together, you have the most well-measured nervous system in science. And that is ground truth. That is the ground truth I just spoke of. And that ground truth is the ingredient for compiling a digital brain using biologically informed artificial neural network for each unique animal. And then you can compare that and test its fidelity against a real animal. This pipeline of measure, compile, and compare is exactly what separates science fiction from science. And C. elegans is the only animal that we can run this pipeline through currently, in my opinion. So by working on and refining this pipeline, we're on the fastest track towards a roadmap towards whole human brain emulation. So going back to that original point, are we uploading human minds anytime soon? Absolutely not, okay? And should anyone even be making claims about whole brain emulation at this point? I would say probably not either. But is this finally real science instead of science fiction? With a real scientific direction, scientific instrument, and scientific hypotheses? Yes, absolutely yes. In this world of rapid technology development, both hypes and doubts can be very overwhelming. But as the famous saying goes, in God we trust, all others must bring data. So, as scientists, it is our social responsibility to bring in reliable measurement and interpreting those data honestly. And that social responsibility gets even more salient when you consider the societal demand from whole brain emulation. Decades of well-funded collaboration, as well as sustained public interest, will all be required for this goal to reach its finish line. And in return, its impact on humanity will also be transformative. From neurological diseases to AI, from understanding emotions to understanding what it means to be human. The impact of whole brain emulation will become increasingly disruptive as it progresses, which is why the discourse cannot belong solely to the neuroscientists or the tech billionaires. It has to belong to all of us. Because for each of us, the biggest contribution of whole brain emulation may not need to be digital immortality. It may also be a profound appreciation of what makes you, you, and me, me. In this world and for the first time in this world, we're asked a scientifically measurable question that we have only asked philosophically before. What is the minimum information required to be you? And in trying to answer that question, we may come to realize not just how extraordinary it is to recreate a brain, but how extraordinary the mind you already have truly is. Thank you.